So Games Workshop just announced Apocalypse is being re-released, rebooted, relaunched. We have a lot to talk about in this podcast, in this vlog. I need to organize these categories here and kind of push out a couple of observations, a couple of experiences, and a little bit of a wish list thrown in there for Apocalypse. Certainly, I enjoy the 40K narrative. I enjoy the models. I enjoy the game itself, but I would say that a big component for me is the social aspect, getting together with some friends, rolling some dice, blowing some stuff up, and the more friends that can play, the bigger games that we can have, the more models on the table, the better. And while some of us certainly have big collections out there, you can't top getting together with 3 or 4 or 5 or 6 friends, throwing down all of your models, and as a group, collectively creating something that is impossible as the individual, with a little bit of a dash of the more players, the more fun, the more wacky stuff going on. So from that perspective, Apocalypse, big games, I mean, you could do one-on-one. I think Mini Wargaming has something like an 80,000 point Chaos Space Marine army. I mean, you could have some epic games one-on-one, but Apocalypse is designed for community collaboration on there. So right away when it was reduced in 5th edition, the beginning of 5th edition, Warhammer 40,000, I was sold. I was immediately in, and I really, really enjoyed it from that perspective. Now at the time, Games Workshop was in a very interesting place, and this is what I'm curious to see, because the idea with Apocalypse was, at the time, so this is going back like a decade, 10 years ago. The idea was, at the time, 40K was locked in a certain way of playing. This was pre-Age of Sigmar. This was before they blew up the old world and everything. And with that lock of how things were played, Games Workshop I believe, wanted to take the community to a new place, wanted us to play a new type of 40K, but they knew to radically change that and do that, I would say, would break the game. And what I mean by that is, in 5th edition 40K, we didn't have detachments, you didn't have formations, you didn't have command points, you didn't have free models, you had a very restricted force org chart, you had no allies, the various things through the editions since then, and on top of that, in a semblance of some sort of balance, you had a number of 0-1 units. Do you guys remember taking Oblitz that were 0-1? Which meant for your entire army, the most you could take was 1 from that detachment. Now, ultimately, look, 40K, we can play whatever we want and do whatever we want, but having rules, not just rules for the actual how to play the game, but rules on how to build an army, means as a community, we can go and we can play a game, and it is, in theory, somewhat fair and balanced. It's what allows me to play at one place and literally pack up my army, travel somewhere else, and play elsewhere. There's kind of this equalizing effect. Games Workshop wants us to play bigger games. They want us to throw down more models, and they want us to make that jump. And at the time, the only way they could do it, and this is what, as I believe about 10 years ago, their future vision of 40K, massive battles, throw the dollar signs up there, and us playing with huge, huge armies, and they were free. They didn't have to worry about the rules anymore. They didn't have to worry about balance anymore, simply because, well, you work it out with your friend. And what we saw was this idea of stratagems. You saw some early ideas of formations. You saw stuff like line breakers, take 10 vindicators, and get this free stuff out there as powers. And a lot of it was untested, unbalanced, over the top, and you needed multiples and multiples and multiples of models on there. But they freed themselves from the rules. They freed themselves for the balance. They shifted that responsibility off, I was going to say to the consumers, but to the consumers and the players out there. But it worked. It worked because Apocalypse was so massive, you couldn't really get upset or take it that seriously from a competitive angle. And on that perspective, in many ways, playing big games of Apocalypse, besides the social aspect, I found it helped me to develop many interesting tactics, simply because the scope of what you were up against was massive, and you really had to plan and execute and strategize with multiple players and keep players on track and things like that. What we also saw was, at the time, integrating Super Heavies, Titans, Lords of War, Primarchs, all that Forge World stuff that was hidden away and unrestricted. Now it was fully available as something you could play. Well, it's interesting. The current edition of 40K, and this is what has me very excited, looks a lot like Apocalypse did, only slightly smaller. Now there's all sorts of, over the years, everything that was in Apocalypse is on regular tabletop 40K. So I'm interested to see with this re-release, and they're really hyping it up. It's almost to the point, and this is not a criticism, like GW, there are a number of us playing that have been playing for a number of years. We remember Apocalypse. You're trying to sell this like it's something new out there. So my question was, and this is what I'm thinking about myself, early Apocalypse was the direction Games Workshop wanted to go. They were not at a place to execute it yet. Now, all these years later, the 40K 8th edition that we're playing, that's Apocalypse from years ago. So whatever they release right now with Apocalypse, is that where they see the next edition or two of 40K, where they want to push things and where they want to go? I mean, is there some comparison? It's interesting, the Warhammer community also released this new type of expansion, and we're going to look at it because this might pull me into Age of Sigmar. It really might, where it's this idea of arcane magic and all this stuff and wizards, and I'm like, wait a second, that's called arcane magic from Warhammer Fantasy. I got the book with the little spinner and stuff because I used to play goblins and summon things, where essentially you had wizards and magic users in the Warhammer Fantasy genre that you could summon these huge models that they were selling for, and the model kits were fantastic. So that's being released at the same time. Are we going back to that? And I'm all for Games Workshop revisiting classics, but don't necessarily try and sell it like it's something new. So my hope for Apocalypse now is that they make the game very dynamic, and the leaps that they took with original Apocalypse and Innovate push to now. What I would say, the challenge with Apocalypse is you have so much stuff on the table. And of course, you could scale it up or down. It's not so much the time invested in playing, it's the fact that the scope of the gaming table, the limit of the gaming table, even if we put 5 or 6 tables together, that's what we did. We would put 5 or 6 tables long, 2 tables deep, have a big battlefield, but you still essentially lined up, and you still essentially pushed towards the center. So what that meant was there was a lot of models and units in the back that just kind of hung out there. Now, maybe they were large tanks and Death Strike missile batteries and basilisks and things like that in theory could shoot, but there was a lot of stuff just hanging out there. Of course, my Samhan Warhost, having the mobility to fly over and the speed, it was able to get back there. But what I would say and recommend, and your thoughts on Apocalypse or Big Games 40K, I'd like to see them, and this is how you would tactically balance it. Give up trying to balance 40K. It's just done. It's over. It's not going to happen, especially if you make Apocalypse mainstream 40K. What will balance it is options, the tactics. Come up with ways of different, and we saw pieces of this here and there. Come up with different ways of deployment. Come up with null deployment, essentially, is what I'm saying. For those of you who've been following my exploits in my channel and my blog for a while, allow different stratagems, allow different command execution points, whatever you want to call it, doesn't matter, where my units are not just, hey, I'm on this side, you're on that side, we push forward. Make it dynamic. Make it so that more stuff can teleport in. Make it so that stuff can suddenly appear. Maybe make it so that units can appear inside units, and now you initiate an assault. Make it where things can come in on the left or the right side of the table, the back side of the table, the corners of the table. Make it a 360 up, down, top, bottom, all directions type game. When you allow that to happen, and it won't be every turn. There has to be some sort of resource management, maybe in command points, maybe with unit stratagems that I buy. They can sell me 10 more decks of cards to utilize. You do that on there. Now I don't have to worry about balance as much, because if you're sitting in the back with 3 Titans, then right now in 40K, I line up, you just blow me up and we're done. But if I can be off the table, we talked about that a little bit with elite armies, interesting timing on there. If I can attack from other sides, if I can immediately enter into the assault, if I have cards that could offer a way to sabotage or interact with units, that changes everything. And now the more tactics that you give me, the less you have to worry about and get away from game balance. I do have to say, based on how GW has been releasing things and the effort that they have been putting into in terms of production quality and resources and support, I have been very impressed. And it's always been very impressive for Games Workshop to do that. I think this is a great, great thing. I mean, I'm really pumped. I'm really excited for Apocalypse. I want to see the spin and where they take it and where they push it. But I will definitely be there on day one. We're going to have to do some sort of big Apocalypse type event. It's now just a question of loyalist or chaos.